Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm the head of programs here at National Cultures. For those of you who could use this for access, you can see a live transcript of the conversation by clicking on the CC at the bottom of your screen. And that will turn on the transcript. That's an automatic transcript. We will also have BSL interpreters available to you throughout. If you have any issues with access, please send a message to myself or Metroland Cultures, that's my colleague Lindsay, and we can help you with either of those. Alrighty, thank you so much for being with us this evening. We are here at Metroland Cultures, a new charity that's platforming the voices of people in Brent through arts and culture. And this is our third conversation as part of our series, Conversations on Visibility. And the purpose of these is really to look at how we want to work at Metroland Cultures to create platforms for visibility for cultural activity in Brent and beyond. So this is the third of our conversations, and I'm super, super excited to have you all with us. So just so you know, we're going to be recording this conversation, so you won't be visible at all, only the panelists will be. But the questions that you put in, if those get read out later on, for example, those will be recorded. So just for your knowledge. So let me just tell you a bit about how this is going to work. So in a second, I'm going to hand over to Bilal Harry Khan, who's our facilitator for today. Bilal will say a couple of words to frame tonight's conversation. And then Bilal will introduce our three speakers, and each of them will have an opportunity to say about 5 minutes worth in relation to the topic from their perspective, a bit about themselves and what they do and how they come at these questions of speaking across difference. And then they'll have a conversation amongst themselves for a while, and at the end there'll be an opportunity for you to join us. And to do that, you'll be able to type your questions into the Q&A box, and feel free to do that at any time throughout the conversation, and then we'll pick them up when we get to that part of the event. So yeah, the next thing to do now is to introduce my colleague Eliel. And Eliel is here to support us with some community space guidelines. So Eliel will speak you through those. And if you have any issues about anything arising in the conversation and could use Eliel's support, you can send a message to Eliel or to any of us in the chat, and we will sort that out. All right, over to you, Eliel.
Can you hear me? Yes, thanks everyone. Super nice to be here with you. And as Lauren mentioned, I'm here to facilitate the safe space guidelines for the discussion today. And I will read them out loud so that everyone's aware of them. And I will also post them on the chat so you can refer back to them if you need to. Number 1, ableism, homophobia, racism, sexism, transphobia, or prejudice based on ability, asylum status, class, ethnicity, gender presentation, nationality, or religion is not welcome here. Number 2, respect everyone's identity and background, including pronouns and names. Do not assume anyone's gender identity, sexual preference, survivor status, economic or immigration status, background, health, etc. Number 3, respect everyone's physical and emotional boundaries. Check in before discussing topics that may be triggering, for example, sexual abuse, racism, physical violence, or encounters with police. Number 4, respect that there are varying opinions, beliefs, experiences, and privileges, as well as different ways of learning and interacting. Collectively, we recognize the power dynamics that exist here. Beware of the space you take up, your assumptions and prejudices, and allow space for all voices to participate. Number 5, be responsible for your own actions and the language you use. Be aware that your actions and language have an effect on others, despite what your intentions may be. Number 6, take collective and individual responsibility for creating a safer space for everyone. And number 7, work together to foster a spirit of mutual respect. Listen to the wisdom everyone has to share. So I will post those in the chat as well for reference. And as Lauren said, if you have any concern or questions that you'd like to share, please do get in touch via the chat function. I think we might have lost our BSL interpreter, but we can, oh, there we are.
I'm not sure what happened there. I apologize for that. Sorry.
No worries. Nice to have you back.
Okay, thank you very much, Eliel. So yeah, just over to our wonderful panelists now. So I'll hand over to Bilal to kick things off, and Bilal will introduce the others in turn. Thank you very much and enjoy.
Thanks, Lauren. And hey, everyone, good evening. I hope everyone's having a good evening wherever you might be in the world. It's evening for me. It's very, very dark outside my house. My name's Bilal and my pronouns are he, him, and I'm going to be your facilitator this evening as we move into our conversation. Now, just by way of getting started, I know some of you might not be able to see me. It might just be that you're on the wrong view. So if you go to the top right of your screen, you'll see view. If you click on gallery, you'll hopefully be able to see everyone that's here as part of the panel. But really, really lovely. I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to have. A little bit about what to expect. So this evening, there's going to be some deep conversation, I'm sure, based on some of the pre-chat I had with our really wonderful panel. We're also going to have lots of fun, and I gather that already, given the vibe of some of the people here. This is a space for reflection as well. I really want to invite everyone here to use as a space to reflect. And what we're here to do is to think about language, how we communicate across difference, how we communicate when things aren't going well, how we communicate without language, right? And what do we do when we might speak a different language to someone else? In all of this, what's so key to know is that we're all going to bring different lived experiences and different perspectives, and that's absolutely okay. Like, all of us have lived different lives. What we might be open to hearing this evening might not be things that we've particularly experienced, but hopefully that will open up new ideas and new perspectives and a new way of seeing things. So I'm super excited to hear from those present on our panel about what this means for them. But just for you, as our lovely audience, I want to encourage you to use the chat as much as possible throughout this. I know sometimes Zoom calls, we might be really Zoom fatigued by now after 2 years of a pandemic, but please do come into the chat whenever you're ready. If you want to say something, amplify something that's been said by someone already, or just make a point, and we'll try our best to pick up on that as we go through. But a bit about myself, because you're probably looking at me thinking, who's this guy? He's got a great beard, but I know nothing else about him. So my name is Bilal. I was brought up in Brent. I lived in Neasden for much of my life. I've now migrated, I know, a bit sad, a little bit more West London. So I'm still close to home. My mum and dad are still there, so go back and see them and eat food, hang out by Neasden Station. Other than that, I've got 2 cats called Rum and Ginger, and an 8-month-old son. So that's a little bit about myself, how I've come into being here, because that's not relevant, right? How have I come to facilitate this panel? I work a lot in diversity and inclusion, which means that I host uncomfortable conversations with all sorts of organizations across the world, often navigating difficult topics around racism, sexism, inclusion, how we build that into our everyday lives. But I got to that work by working with young people. So I started off in the youth sector, kind of migrated again into working full-time with adults. So hopefully I can bring a bit of perspective to this conversation as well, with my own lived experience. But you're not really here to listen to me. You're here because we've got an incredible panel lined up for us. We've got Rami, we've got Shenece, we've also got Moeed. So we're going to go by in turn. I'm just going to introduce our panel. As I introduce you, just tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what you think in relation to this topic around language. So Rami, you're top of my screen. I'm going to kick off with you.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me all right?
Sounds good to me.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I guess first off, just thank you to Mitchellland, thank you to Lauren and Lyle and Lindsay. Thank you to Vivi and Lorna, who are doing our BSL tonight. And yeah, I think I was struggling a little bit about thinking what to talk about, like for this little introduction, because it could have been, I don't speak Arabic very well, and my parents obviously do. And then there's that difference. But the other day, I work as an apprentice software developer, and my mentor said to me, you know, when you write code, you're telling a story. And that to me was fascinating, because it started this spark in my head thinking about how we rely on stories in order to communicate ourselves, in order to receive the world and reflect it back. And I think it's fascinating how stories sort of interact with the world that we live in, a relationship with reality and with play and with understanding. I think that's the big one, because we try to package like all these kind of huge ideas into very tiny words, like these sounds, as if like the polarity of anger can be expressed in just a sound, or hope, or happiness, or sadness. And it can't. So we tell stories. And they become sort of something more than the words that they're made up of. because now we're building up a narrative of ourselves, of who we are and what we've done. And that's a powerful thing to do, because once you do that, you're reaching out to someone. You're not just saying, you know, when we tell the stories of a work nightmare or how we saw an ex in the park or something, we're not just saying, this is what happened to me. We're saying, here's the world as how I experience it. Here's what I feel. This is who I am. Do you understand? And I think that's the big thing. Do you understand? Because if the answer is no, if it's consistently no, then you're invisibilized. You're not just like, you don't just fall out of existence to the people that don't listen to you, but also for yourself. Like, you aren't a person anymore if you're not understood, seen, you're not being. And that isn't really on us, that's on others to understand. So yeah, I think a lot of stories, how we project them into the world, is about our deep anxiety that we are alone in the world, and we're not. And I think that's quite a beautiful thing, and something we have to consistently, constantly be reminded of. And I think that is particularly fascinating. Yeah.
I love that, Rob. I'm feeling really warm just hearing you talk, right? You've got such a nice, kind and warm voice.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you something about stories, right? Because I remember reading loads of stories in school and then kind of just stopped after that, which is bad. But stories, right? They're up for interpretation. When it comes to the way that different people might interpret the same story in a different way, what would you say about that in relation to how we might engage with different people when stories themselves can be interpreted quite differently?
I think that's an excellent question that I have never thought. So thank you for going into that. I think when we have these different interpretations of stories, it can be that it's just objectively wrong, right? It can be that, no, this doesn't follow the facts. This isn't something that is correct. But a lot of the time, most of the time, it is about who this person is and what they've experienced and how they've grown up. And I think even if it's the most sort of abhorrent, disgusting stuff, at some level, I want to be personally thinking, okay, but why? Why is this the way that you interpret the story around us? Like, why is this the way that you are trying to tell this story? Because once you get that understanding, once you have that, even compassion, I think, for these sort of terrible thoughts, these terrible things that might happen, or these wonderful ones, you start to understand that, like, no, actually, that leads to a lot of loneliness, a lot of anger, a lot of difficulty in life. And that's quite sad, I think. So I think in terms of different understandings or different interpretations of stories, I still want to try and understand to get to the point where it's like, oh, okay, I think I get it now. And I don't agree, but you're still a human being. I want to be the person who gives what they don't. Yeah,
I love that. I think when we think about how we communicate across difference, right? Compassion, understanding, really drawing that out from what you said, Rami. I'm looking forward to chatting to you more, but we've got other people to introduce in our panel today. So Shenece, hello, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you, Rami. That was a beautiful introduction. Already got me super interested in how this conversation is going to go. I'm good. The temperature is all right. I feel warm enough. And I'm just really thankful to be here amongst you. I'm Shenece Oretha. I'm an artist. I mostly work in sound, and those sounds include the voices of my community that are important to me. I try and celebrate them, I try and embrace them, and I try and reflect them back to them in a way that allows them to hear it differently, and also like shows the shape of our communion, the shape of our conversation, whether that be across the dinner table, whether that be in pairs, and also celebrate the mobilizing potential of the voice, right? Because I think I was speaking recently about how speech has so much power in it. And I've always wanted to understand, I guess, where that power comes from. So a lot of my work looks at the kind of the microphone, the speaker, the kind of elements that we use to amplify them, and tries to understand, looking at the speaker woofer, how air is passed through that, and how that air touches each person in the space, and how if you put something on top of that air, which is someone's voice, it moves, it shakes, it trembles, it vibrates. So I look at those moments in my artwork, and I say I'm sounding out possibilities in art for being. So in that sentence, what I'm really just trying to say is that there are tools in art, I think, that can be used in service to people. For example, in the kind of experimental vocal tradition, this kind of call and response and the listening methods that they use there can be shared with other people to be used in their life. I use them in my own life, and I use my art in my life, and I teach, and I create workshops, and I create sessions, which I hope shows that people can take with them. For example, a recent one was called Listening as a Whole. And I think teaching the mechanisms of listening, or teaching or having a wider understanding of listening is important to speech, is important to language, is important to voice. You don't want people to have to continue to repeat themselves constantly if there's nobody listening, right? So having that relationship between the speaking voice and the listener is important in my practice. And different works may attune to the listener, and different voices attune to the voice. And whether it be the voice of a person, more and more so, I'm kind of also trying to think about the locality, the history. So in Listening as a Whole, I asked different practitioners of art to kind of share how listening plays out in their practice. And for example, I asked Evan Koya, and we looked at kind of sounds resonance in spirituality and that power. We asked Carol Wright from Black Outside, who walked us around London, Blackfriars, their ends, and gave us the history of that area, and what we were walking on, and what voices were being silenced in that area, and tried to amplify and listen to the nature, and listen to the people and the histories, past and present. And then also we listened to the third session was with an artist called Michener, who is a wonderful vocalist, and she taught us so much about listening, about how it's a thing we can do when we slow down, and what it means to walk slowly and listen outwardly and listen inwardly, and how the body is really important when trying to think about listening and speech, and how we did a workshop where we had to shake, and our voices kind of changed as we shaked, and how that movement was important. So yeah, I think about art as a tool and as a service, and I'm trying to continually think about that sort of stuff. So I'm really glad that Metroland is thinking about community, and hopefully that the art programming can work with people.
I love that, Shenece. I love the idea of sound and listening, right? And particularly around art as a medium for perhaps communicating across difference. I know for a fact, right? I'm not the best artist, but sometimes I can interpret a piece of art and I'm I can kind of get what this person's trying to say, even though they're not talking directly to me. So I really hear that. We got one more panelist to introduce before we dive into our conversation. So Moeed, how you doing, and welcome.
Hi everyone. Thanks Bilal for the little intro. Hi Shenece and Rami. I think you guys are great. And everyone here as well. Lorna and Vivi too. Gonna get a massive bicep workout. I'm sorry, I speak quite fast. But yeah, no, my name's Moeed Majeed, born and bred in Brent. Massive. I love where I was born. I love where I grew up. I love the eclectic kind of cultural nature of it. And yeah, it's kind of obviously shaped me, and I'm sure everyone else, into the person they are today. In terms of myself, I'm a podcast producer, I'm a radio presenter, and I just like making fun content. That's just kind of where the direction I've fallen into, and thankfully, I'm just really passionate about it. I kind of fell into the podcasting when I somehow got a job with Vice, and thankfully, it was working alongside Brent, which was the London Borough of Culture in 2020. Obviously, who remembers last year where some little thing happened, the pandemic. So we managed to work with a lot of young people from Brent and give them a platform to express themselves and, just share their voice. Everyone's got something to say. That's something I live by. Everyone's got something to say, but they're just not sure, or maybe don't have a place or a space where they feel like they're able to express themselves. And I felt privileged to be able to give them a platform with Vice. Some people, it's their first time ever being in a studio or you're holding a microphone, and I was in awe of these young people and their ability to express themselves and articulate themselves in ways that I wish I could when I was their age. So I suppose my passion for language and visibility, I suppose, developed or was reinforced through that experience. And I'm just so passionate about getting young people's voices out there. I want Brent to be a creative hub that is known nationwide, worldwide. And I feel like young people or anyone, whatever age they are, should be aware or know of ways or spaces where they're able to speak about just life's experiences. One guy, there's places in Willesden Green, two separate parts of Willesden Green, and they probably have two completely different lifestyles. The other side of Willesden Green Station, boy, and just down Willesden High Street. Two complete, walking distance from each other, but they've probably never spoken before. So I'm really, again, that my favorite word, passionate, just about getting these conversations out there for people to listen to. And all it is young people speaking to each other, but ultimately you're educating others about what it's like to grow up in a specific place, how environmental factors affect you. And I think, conversations like this are fantastic. We can share our collective knowledge and help maybe even fast track or just making other people or young people or whatever age you are understand what it's like to be in this space, and that this space is for everybody.
Thank you, Moeed. And Moeed, I also feel like you're being a bit humble there because you're telling us about your Vice podcast. Come on, there's people listening. Tell us what happened in the end.
Yeah, so with the Vice podcast, it did pretty well. We won Podcast of the Year at the British Podcast Awards. We won about 7 or 8 awards, in fact, which was obviously amazing because these are the voices of young people from Brent. Like I said, for the first time, meeting some of their heroes. It's always nice when a platform like Vice, obviously it's world renowned, and they can easily get contacts which the average Mo wouldn't be able to get. Do you know what I'm saying? So using that platform and then bringing these young people into that space, some of them were just like in shock with the people they were meeting and having conversations with. But now that thought process and that whole experience is ingrained in their mind, and they know that they're able to do it. And I just find that an amazing thing. And obviously it's a very surreal feeling, and I'm grateful for winning all these awards, but ultimately without the young people who are involved, I ain't winning anything. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's a nice thing to have. Now it's just about, off the back of that, what can we do to continue the momentum? And again, like I said, conversations like this with all of you amazing people is a massive step in the right direction.
I love that. Well, thank you, Moeed, Shenece, Rami. So nice to be here in this space with you all this evening. So nice to be in this space with you all, incredible audience. As I said from the start, the chat is open, right? Feel free to open up your chat here on Zoom. You can type any comments that you have to our panelists, anything that you want to say in response to anything that comes up throughout this conversation. We want this to be as organic and free-flowing as possible. Let's imagine that we're all in a physical room together, right? And let's move into this conversation. Now, just as we go in, right, I was doing some research, because I'm that guy, about language, and I was researching Brent, because that would make sense, right, as a place to start. Now, Brent, in the 2011 census, apparently had over 150 languages spoken just in Brent alone. And apparently 37% of the people in Brent, their main language wasn't English, right? Which really got me thinking about, well, how are people in Brent talking to each other? Like, how's that even working? Last night I went to see a Zadie Smith play, the new one that's open at the Kiln. And I know that Zadie Smith talks a lot about like a Brent specific accent, right? That people in Brent have their own voice that is unique to anywhere else in the world. Now, I don't know about that personally, even being from Brent. But that sort of got me thinking about our main question for tonight, which I want to just pose to the three of you, and we'll kind of give a go at making some kind of answer here. Now, when we think about language, right, language as a whole, what language do we even need in order to communicate across difference? Because it could be easy to say, well, English, right? We all speak English. That's the language that we need. But when we talk about language itself, what language do we need to communicate across difference? I'm going to leave that there. And whoever wants to unmute and jump in first, just feel free. And you don't all need to jump at once, by the way.
Yeah, I don't mind going first. In terms of what language, I think regardless of the language, it's just about having an understanding with the person you're getting the message across to, right? It could be English, could be Swahili, Urdu, Hindi, whatever language you're speaking in. It's just about understanding, is the person I'm speaking to gonna understand the message that I'm trying to get across? When you have a conversation, if I'm speaking to someone and they just don't understand what I'm saying, then ultimately, what are we, either of us, getting out of this conversation? I feel like right now, obviously my focus is the language and the relationship between young people or people from a place like Brent, and looking at spaces that they feel like they're not a part of. That's kind of where my focus is in terms of the language, and communicating from this space up here, which is really down here, and getting that message across, or getting that communication between the young people from Brent and these spaces here. So obviously it's been, we all know the kind of the majority demographic of the creative industry, and slowly they're seeing, with obviously the emergence of social media and all of these independent platforms where young people in general can build a platform for themselves and build a massive following, they're seeing, wow, there are people out there, we've just never spoken to them or seen them before. And they're slowly beginning to communicate in languages that they're able to understand. An example, Chunks, do you know what I'm saying? Look at Chunks. He's a Brent boy. He's grown up there, but now you see him in everything. All of the brands are using him. He was on Sky Sports. He just did a Gillette advert and all that kind of stuff, because he is relatable for young people. Obviously, there are many other questions and many other things that need to be addressed, but it's a step in the right direction. So ultimately, I think we are going in the right direction. I think there's a lot more to do, and it's more about putting people in the position who make those decisions and are able to speak in a language that we all understand. Those people need to be in the positions that make the decisions, rather than a group of people that all speak to each other, but no one else kind of understands what's going on.
Hey, I hear you on that, right? And I'd love to open it to Rami, Shenece in a sec. But when we think about like language that can sometimes be very insular, so like academic language, for example, now I went to uni, I still don't understand academic language, right? Sometimes it can feel like very far removed or alien, particularly when we're trying to relate to young people. And I'm just curious, because we've got BSL interpreters here as well, right? And what you just kind of put to me, Moeed, was almost like you were the middle ground as a youth worker between the language of young people and the language of perhaps people who make those decisions, almost like an interpreter per se. I just want to pick up on what's in the chat before I throw it to Rami and Shenece. 3 Yards says Kilvin car boot sell bartering is a universal language. Lol. Like, it's a joke, but also I've been in places around the world where bartering is absolutely how we communicate. Right now, just Rami, Shenece, who wants to come back or add to what Moeed said here?
Are you all right with me going next, Shenece? Cool, thank you. Yeah, I agree. And I was thinking about it, thinking about what Moeed said as well. And you're right, that kind of like bartering is almost like a universal language. And it's thinking about those kind of like, those very like basic human experiences. Like we mostly understand what a smile means, right? You can go anywhere in the world and smile at someone, and you understand. And you can also go anywhere in the world and grimace, and people will understand that as well. I think you're right. Like, if you see two people bartering, I remember being in Jordan years and years ago and watching my mom barter with this guy in a language I talking way too fast for me to understand, but I knew exactly what was happening. And that's actually pretty special, I think, because it does kind of imply that there's something human about us all that we can connect on, that is possible. And I was also really interested in earlier what Shenece said about like sound as a physical thing, as something to do with your body and like how you experience it that way. And, you know, we can all, in music, we can feel the beat as well, can't we? Even if we don't hear the music or understand like that way, we can feel the beat and understand that. So yeah, I think it's a really, really interesting question about, I don't know if there is a language that we can all communicate with, but there's certainly like ways we can all communicate, right? Ways we can all hear each other, see each other.
Yeah, like expression is such a, like you said, you know, anyone around the world understand hopefully what a smile means, right? Or what a grimace means. But many times I'm one of those people, I talk like this, right? I talk with my hands, and so many people around the world I've met just understand me by just making quite basic gestures when I'm abroad. And it's like that one there when I'm trying to buy something, right? Shenece, what might you say on this?
I love what has already been said, have to say that. And I was going to speak to music as well for a moment, because the physicality as well as the listening moment of music, where it's like a fast pace, a beat to its most basic moment. Again, it comes back to the air. But I wanted to, the question is interesting because it's like to say that I wonder if differences is something that needs to be flattened, or if differences is something that can be celebrated in the languages, and understanding, have an understanding of difference that allows us to kind of communicate. So that person is different to me. What can I grasp in that? And what I may be able to do is in that gesticulation that they're giving is also a thing that they may do in Italian and another language, for example. I love the idea of the smile. I also wanted to talk about maybe relating to the way that Moeed was talking about, like talking to young people about like how we shape ourselves to have a conversation in the first place. So like Zoom kind of flattens it, but what you might do is like, I'm in a circle, I want all of your voices to be heard, even if we can't understand it, trying to be like, this is a communal space. And their differences are to be celebrated here. A lot of the formations of speakers I work in is circular, because I see that shape a lot of the time across cultures, about we're trying to understand each other, so we are forming a circle. And I think about like these kind of like positions of like top-down speaking, flattening in maybe a way. Like, I love the idea of Moeed as an interpreter between the two. And I think there's a shape there that is being created, you know, like this hierarchy. And I look at that and I think, maybe if we could get an understanding of that, we can reshape it and turn it back upside down. And lots of my drawings look like that. It's like, well, power looks like duh. How about, you know, and I'm thinking about that sort of thing. But also shout out to Free Out, because yeah, bartering is a universal language.
I hear that. This might sound a bit deep, right? But Shenece, you've just blown my mind here, because I'm thinking about the way that power functions in communication. And when we think, so here's an example, right? When you migrate to a country, the expectation is that you learn that language or you assimilate into that culture. Or when you start in a new organization, there's like hierarchy and dynamics about like who gets to speak or who has the right to speak. And I guess like what's coming to mind for me is the cost on who. So who's bearing that extra work, right, of having to either learn English or learn a new language when you come into that place, or who's not getting their voice heard. And on that, and just thinking around, like when we think, really, I'm getting like tangible here, about like language itself, how can we communicate with people when they might speak an entirely different language, or when they might be in a totally different position of power, is what's coming up for me here.
I'll just jump on the back of that, just quickly to say, yeah, I'm thinking about it constantly too. And I think one of the ways that I've learned through poets and through writers who are describing voices, you know, when I'm listening to text and stuff, they'll say things about like how a voice sounds to people. For example, I think Rami, you mentioned anger earlier. And I think about how Audre Lorde says that when in her essay Uses of Anger, she says like, when people are angry, people stop listening, you know, like when they hear the anger, right? So I think about like, no matter what's being communicated in the language, people are kind of interpreting how it's being said, how this is being said to me, how that sounds to that person. And I think, yeah, listening for those small moments where like, okay, I may not understand what you're saying, but I can hear the quietness in your voice. I can hear how you may be like squashing your voice because there's a fear, there's a, you know, or I can hear in the amplification of your voice, how passionate you are about something. One of my friends, Amani, said something really interesting. She was like, you know, like she'll watch Shakespeare, right? And she don't know what they're saying. She doesn't know what they're saying. But like it's the way the actor is acting it that is actually helping her understand what is being said.
Right.
And I think there's so much around language, right, that allows us to actually understand what is being said. And the understanding is, I guess, what's important.
Really hear that. Moeed, Rami, because you both look like you got something on the tip of your tongue there. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, Shenece, I agree with you completely. But going off the back of something you said earlier, Bilal, and Rami, I think you all said it, in fact, and how like obviously it's very difficult to communicate with someone, obviously, if you speak two completely different languages, but there are universal signs, obviously, hello, come, and what's the easiest way to get to someone's heart, man? Eat, you want to eat something, do you know what I'm saying? Like, there are certain ways we can communicate with each other, and if you're both on the same wavelength, say, for example, this is just a random scenario I've created here. You both work for the same company, and there's two of you, and you both, one is the Arabic correspondent, and you're obviously the one that works in London. You both have the same mentality, and you both have the same kind of understanding of what your role is, and you're working under the same bubble. So there are certain things that you're going to be able to understand even though you don't speak the same language, if that makes sense. So I think regardless, so if you think of the wider picture and being outside of a company, just think of the world as the example. If you're just a nice person and you meet another nice person on a road, like you're gonna get along in it. I'm a weird guy. I'm that guy that will just chat to anyone on the street. You know what I'm saying? I will chat to anyone on the tube, on the street, whatever. And then and like it's just a nice experience. And you see someone smile, and they're like, you kind of perk their day up. And obviously, I'm a bit of a wacky guy in it, so I'm quite eccentric. So people tend to kind of like just feel the energy, and it kind of revitalizes them. And like I don't know these people, and they probably don't speak the same language as me, even in English. You know what I'm saying? Like my English is completely different to someone else's English. So that's the kind of like more spiritual version of it. But obviously now we have facilities. I don't want to get too like annoying, but obviously like I went to Spain, I'm learning Spanish at the moment, and I find it so frustrating when I forget a word and I can't express myself. So I completely commend people who come to another country, can probably speak 3 or 4 languages and then speak English as well, you know. Sometimes those people are the most vilified for some weird reason. Who knows why? We probably all do. But you know, these people know 4 or 5 languages, can speak to everyone else, but and they're slowly learning English. And we're here like learning like GCSE French, you know what I'm saying? Je voudrais un cahier, whatever. So I think that language is super important. It's beautiful. We're living in a generation now where you've got this Google Translate thing which works. I'm just saying I used it, and boy, that thing is a madness. And I don't want to get too technical, but obviously there are ways excuse me, to get what you're trying to say across. But ultimately I think it's just about kind of like that human connection. And when you have that and you look into someone's eyes and you like just see them as who they are, it doesn't really matter if you can't communicate verbally. I think that, like Rami said, you know, there are ways to kind of sitting at a table and eating food, man. That's the best way to get to someone's heart. Do you know what I'm saying?
I love what you said there, right? A couple of things just on a draw out from what you said, just to hold for our audience listening, is one, food and the importance of food. I'll tell you a quick story. I'll be super quick. My late grandma, when she was alive, she only spoke Urdu and I only speak English, right? So I never spoke to her my whole life. I just remember the day when she just went, food. And that was the one conversation we've ever had. And it was amazing because I ate so much. But after that, right, the other thing that you brought out was about people having the same goal. So you might be working for the same organization, talk totally different languages, but you're working together. But on what you said, Ellie was put in the chat, you can also speak the same language and still not be understood. I thought about something Shenece said before, that there's a difference between hearing and listening. It feels like understanding is very much an intentionality, whether you speak the same language or not, right? So you can still be misunderstood and speak the same language, right? And that happens all the time. You're moving us in a different direction, though, Moeed, and I just want to hold on that because you started talking about Google Translate, right? Which is very practical tip. But the second sort of half of our discussion, I wanted to talk about, well, what do we do or what can we do when we don't speak the same language? And I want to get onto that in a second, but you were already there. So Rami, come in and answer on what you're going to say just before.
Yeah, sorry. Because you'll keep making really smart points. And I just want to comment on the wall. It's great. But like Bilal, you were saying earlier about like, there's an expectation like of people learning a language when they move to a country, and well, not English people, like not French people, and like that's also for me where that power comes in. And I think also thinking about what Moeed was saying about context, about you understand certain things through the context of bubble that you're in, and you don't have to even have met the other person to still understand similar like sort of contextual things. And then also, Shenece, how you were talking about listening as an active thing, as something that we have to do, like really pay attention to. And I think sort of in my head, it kind of melds all together in that like, we all have power to some extent, right? As like people who live in Britain, as people who just are, as even just as people who are older than younger people. And the way we use that power in order to listen, to take a step back, to take an active role in listening and understanding, I think that's a really beautiful use of it, maybe even the only kind of ethical use of power, right? But it seems so difficult to do for so many people. And for me, the question is always like, why? Why is that? Why do we not encourage that kind of like listening and understanding and being with people? Why do we not encourage like finding those contexts that we share with other people? Like Moeed was saying about the world, like this is we all share this earth. Like why can we not use that? I think it's not really something I have an answer to, but it's something that like sort of constantly just fascinates me, that we're not trained, we're not taught to think we can connect with people. That's so strange. Like that's so odd. Like
yeah, I really hear that. I was thinking around like things that we do when we might not speak the same language, right? And one of the things might be that we just misinterpret or just judge where someone else is coming from. Like, for example, when I was growing up, I really thought that Russian and German people were scary because I thought that the accent was scary to me, right? And now knowing Russian and German people as friends and people that I'm close to now, like obviously hearing them talk isn't that frightening, right? But there was this misinterpretation from myself because I couldn't understand that language, and perhaps there was something innately about like not connecting with that, or there was something quite divisive about it. Just on that, want to open the floor to Moeed, Shenece as well. What are some of the other things that we do when we just don't speak the same language? Can be positive things, and you talked about Google Translate being something super practical, but what else?
Shall I go then? Okay.
Yeah, coming in.
what can we do, or what do people do? Sorry.
What do we do? I think we can come on to what can we do, but what are some
I
things that
think
we do?
what do we do? Some people are just too afraid to engage. You might miss out on a whole interaction with another person because you may be a bit nervous, or you may not know how to approach the situation. So that interaction in your lifetime will completely just, you walk straight past them and they'll walk straight past you, and they'll continue with their life and you'll continue with yours, and you never know what could have come out of it. And I'm not talking from the whole of like selfish perspective, it's all about me and I'm going to get something out of that. But in terms of that just life experience interaction, yeah, I've been in situations where, I suppose when I was younger, I can't think of one right now, but I'm sure where I've actively like just avoided those situations because I don't know how to approach it. Like Rami said, we've never been taught. You know, we are taught plenty of things in school, but how many of them are actually practical in real life? Do you know what I'm saying? Not many. So yeah, those are things that we definitely do. Probably ignore the situation, like you said. Unfortunately, it's only natural that, again, when we're young and we're growing up, we grow up with these sort of like preconceived notions and ideas of certain people and certain things. And, you know, thankfully, you know, I'm grateful that we've all been able to break out of that and understand the reality, but it's very difficult. Again, environmental factors play a role as well. You know, if you grow up with certain people in your life that think a certain way, unfortunately, it's just the way you're going to grow up, innit? Like, there's nothing you can really do about it. So again, yeah, like scary people. I'm sure I'm trying to think now, man. What would I have thought? I thought Portuguese was a made up language. Do you know what I'm saying? The first time I heard Portuguese, I was sitting on a bus, the 302, and I was coming home from my grandma's, and I heard this guy speaking this language. I was like, what on earth is that? And obviously now I have like 15 friends in Lisbon, and I go there all the time, and I absolutely love it. But and again, I'd never heard it before, and if I was educated slightly more, maybe taking the time. Again, this was when I was like 14 or 15, so I kind of give myself a little bit of leeway. But yeah, I suppose what we do is let our mind run wild, and the mindset we're in at the time takes over, and that's just how we approach the situation. Again, I look back and I'm like, right, okay, that was Portuguese. And in hindsight, that's great. But at the time, maybe, again, I'm going into what we could do. Again, it's just about kind of, I suppose, educating ourselves and just maybe getting ourselves into those experiences, man. We should get comfortable with being uncomfortable, you know? There's no harm in asking questions as well, because the worst that's going to happen is they're going to say no or like go away. Or you might have a great conversation with someone and make a new friend. Do you know what I'm saying? You never know. So, yeah,
I really hear this idea, and even Simon's put in the chat about making even more assumptions than usual, right? We might make assumptions about people even when we speak the same language, but when we don't understand that language, we make these wild assumptions in our head, right? Also, just on a side note, 302, used to be on that bus myself. But just what I was thinking about when you said Portuguese, I think, you know, it's coming up to Christmas. I can say this now, Love Actually, right? Well, you know that film. You know, there's a scene in that film, that really posh guy I don't know his name, but he's away writing a book or something, and he's writing a book in this town in the middle of, I think, Portugal, I think far away somewhere, where the girl he ends up falling in love with, they don't speak the same language, but they fall in love over like this connection by touch or by whatever it is that they connect by. And I think on a positive note, perhaps, what are some of the positive things that we can do when we don't speak the same language? Anyone want to come in? I'm looking at you, Shenece and Rami.
I mean, one is we could learn. There's someone like really close to us. We could learn a bit of it. I've stuck at Arabic. I'm really bad at it. But I remember like going to Jordan or Sudan. I try really hard to communicate somehow, even with like my broken Arabic, and like, you know, my aunties and my grandmother or whatever, they try just as hard back. I think, you know, that expression of love is actually a really beautiful thing, something that I hold quite close to my chest, and that feels, yeah, I just love to remember it. I guess that. Yeah,
like both making the effort, I suppose, right? I'm not expecting one person. Sorry, I wasn't cutting you off. I was just sort of adding to what you were saying. Come back in, Robert.
Sorry. I think, what was I going to say? Yeah, I was thinking again about Shanice's point about, you know, sound is physical, and like, you know, and what you were saying, Bilal, about Love Actually and all that kind of stuff, like, you know, dance and touch and even just like kind of watching a show together, or watching kind of something with lights and action and something that can be a moment between two people, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a moment in the same language.
Yeah, I love that. Like dance, music, touch. And this point of being vulnerable and open, I suppose, is coming up a lot in the chat. I'm really hearing that from Friyard and Eliel as well. Shenece, anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to say that I agree. I think there was actually a lot lost. Just before we go into positive, I was just going to add that there's a lot lost when we don't listen, and we don't take chances to attempt communication with one another, and it actually can be dangerous. You know, there's danger in not listening, and when people the frictions that are caused, but also the fact that when people aren't heard, they feel a certain way, you know, and it's hard. So in this attempt to kind of sit, as Elio said, in the uncomfortable, sit, and I think it's actually interesting. Like I was just thinking about, like, understanding is one part, but the attempt at understanding is another, and people are willing. Your conversation about your grandma really reminded me, actually, just like there are some things that I heard when I was younger that, or now, that people often older than me will tell me stories, and I'm still there, still trying to grasp kind of exactly what is happening, and but it's kind of being present. And one of the things that I think is a really important factor in listening is actually just being present to that person's presence. I think that becomes really important. And I love the idea about dance as well. I think there's so much in between to somebody's body language, but also this idea that some languages are scary. You have to sit in the uncomfortable then, right? To learn otherwise, you have to be willing to broach the scary, willing to take the moment of, like, actually, no, these people just speak at a louder decibel, and that's how they communicate. That is, like, I grew up with so many different friends, and I go to their house and I'm like, is your mom angry at us? You know, is she angry at us? But no, they just communicate like that. That's how they go. And you have to come back, you have to return. You can't say, like, this is the one time, one only chance to listen to you. You have to give multiple chances for listening and returning to this kind of moments of speech, so that people get multiple opportunities for it.
I'm really loving this idea of, like, both parties having to sort of be vulnerable and do some learning here, and also be open to doing that and reflect and sit in some of that discomfort. Also just want to hold that what's come out a lot in our conversation today is that within one language, there are also different languages. So there's like the language of young people, the language of academics, the language that's different based on your culture and how people talk, and who might have to code switch or who probably isn't doing that, and what's going on within that. And we're going to slowly start moving into Q&A with our audience. So audience, if you do have a question, feel free. You can either type it in the chat as you've been using already, or there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So if you have got questions for our panel, please do type in those so that we can get to them before we wrap up. But I wanted to start moving into Q&A myself. And Moeed, that question that you were asking us before about, like, what should we do? Is, I suppose, where I want to kick this off, right? And I want us to think about, well, within one language, when we're not hearing each other, right, or when we're not communicating effectively, what should we do?
I think it's what Shenece said earlier. Just like take a breath, take a step back, listen. When I was younger, I used to listen to respond. Do you know what I'm saying? I never actually used to listen to take it in. I was always listening and waiting for them to finish so I could go, yo, and just, like, you know, just say something back, which is obviously not the way to go forward, because you're not actually truly appreciating what the other person is saying. So I suppose, yeah, something I've started to do now is just keep my mouth closed. Just keep my mouth closed and speak. And you probably know this, Bilal, I'm sure all of you know this, when you keep quiet, the other person is inclined to continue speaking. And so there might be other things they might want to speak about. You never know. So yeah, what I do personally, just listen a lot more, try to listen. Unfortunately, I'm quite forgetful in it. Like, it's just, I don't know if it's I don't know if it's some sort of genetic thing. There might be some scientific study on it, but I forget quite a lot of things. So even when I do listen, sometimes things might slip through the sieve. But I think the main thing is, in that scenario, in that situation there, the person you're speaking to understands that you are there to hear and to understand, and you feel like they feel like they're actually speaking to someone, and you're taking it in rather than like speaking and bouncing off and reflecting or refracting somewhere else, So yeah, that's something I've developed. Remember, I'm 30 in it, so it took me a while to get to this position, and even now I'm still working on myself, where I'm able to understand people who may not speak the same language, English language, as me, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's kind of what I try to just take a step back, take it a bit slower, and work from there.
I love that. I just want to read out what we've got in the chat from Saima, and correct me if I've mispronounced your name, but service is a universal language. People understand when you help them with what they need. Children of first generation immigrants, PAs for all extended family members for life understand this, right? The act of service, the act of doing stuff for other people being almost a universal language, right? When you meet someone in a different country, or you meet someone here who speaks a different language to you, just the act of going, sorry, I can see you're carrying shopping, I can help you cross the street with that, or something like that, is the universal gesture that's understood. Lauren's put here, I'm wondering, what do you think in terms of organizations, like, what do you all think in terms of what organizations like Metroland can do to facilitate or create space for conversations across difference? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
Shall I go again?
Go ahead.
All right, cool. So what Metroland can do? Well, I suppose, again, this is a great step in the right direction, right? Having conversations like this, I suppose they could begin to work with the local community and figure out, the kind of languages that are spoken around there. Hold real life versions of this where people are able to communicate. And I suppose there's not actually that much for them to do, in that all they really need to do is get people in a room together and watch the magic happen. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not, you don't have to do anything out of this world. You don't have to do anything new or like reinvent the wheel. Just get people together, show them that there are others like them or not like them in their community, and get them in a space where they're safe to express themselves and learn about each other. I definitely feel like that's something that can be happened. Obviously, I know Metroland has the space in Brent, so it's a perfect place. And again, like I said, start local, work your way out, listen to what people have to say, and who knows what will go from there.
I love that. And 3 yards just put here in the chat, just don't be too stiff and rigid, like a lot of arts things, right? Perhaps just being free and open and allowing people that space to express themselves with that patience and that kindness that I think everyone here has shown each other already today. But Shenece, Rami, anything else that you might suggest here?
Okay, thanks, Rami. I think, I was just thinking about like celebrating the communions across difference that are already happening, and I'm sure have happened, and I'm sure have had to take place across many years already in the local area, seeking them out, finding them, asking. I think asking questions is the most active way of listening, to kind of stretch people's points to kind of understand what is already happening. And also, as an organization, but as people, it's great to know what you're dealing with already. You have to acclimatize and attune yourself to what people already have, where you sit, what people already see you as, in a space before like it being like, this is what we can do. It's like, what do people think of you already? And knowing that, and knowing what your position is. Yeah, I like, as a teacher, I always ask for feedback. I always seek a kind of sense of reciprocity, and it's not I'm gonna give out. It's like, you as a student are also part of this learning process, and I'm gonna learn from you, and that's gonna be a mutual thing. I think a lot of the time when we think we're of service, we think we're giving, we don't realize what the people who are there, attendees and other stuff, are giving towards us, especially in something like this chat right now. People are giving to us, and we're learning from them as much as I hope that they will be thinking about what we're thinking about too.
Yeah, I love that. Like, and I was thinking earlier, I think something that Moeed said made me think about the way that often young people are seen as just having to take, or not being able to impart their voice onto things, or onto services, or onto how a lesson goes, or onto what that curriculum looks like, right? But well, how do we create the space, have those conversations? We give everyone equal voice, so there's not like one voice designing everything for someone else, but actually everyone has an equal footing in inputting there. Rami, I know that you were coming in just before.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, I mean, first of all, with young people, I think I don't really know anyone who works with young people, at least in a sort of youth work context, that doesn't think of them as like these incredible beings that like offer so much to us, and like that we learn from every day. And I think to do with that, I love what Shenece, I think, was saying about asking questions. But I think also giving people space, giving people the chance to take up space, to be like, I'm here and I want to be here. I want to share myself with other people, and that can be so difficult for people to do, because it's that form of vulnerability, right? And we're so conditioned to protect ourselves at every corner, so conditioned to be like, I don't want to connect because what if I'm hurt? That to encourage that soft kind of space to let people take up whatever they want to take up, to be and be messy as well. I think that's really important. And I think also that kind of like, you can't just offer space a lot of the time. A lot of the time you have to go out and say like, there's this space, please join us. We would really love to have you. And just making sure people know that, because often I think people don't believe it. Like, why would anyone want me? Well, no, we do. Like, I really want you. Yeah.
Yeah, like meeting people where they're at, right? Like often it's, well, no, we've got this thing, you need to come here, and it's going to be right now at this time. But also just meeting people and allowing them to feel they can occupy that space and be welcome in that space. I'm just curious, because I haven't seen any questions in the Q&A bit so far. Also, if you don't know how to find that, you can also type things in the chat and we can read them out, audience, if you have got questions you want to pose to our panel. But I've got one while we're waiting for questions. When we think about complex ideas, right, or complex problems, or maybe even things that might feel a little bit like out there as a concept, how do you communicate those things when language might be different? Because one of the things I was thinking about this when Shenece talked about art earlier on as like a medium for stuff, and I was thinking, what have I seen? But I couldn't think of anything. But how do we communicate complex stuff?
I wonder if a part of it is to kind of communicate as much as you can, as simply as you can, and then just trust the other person. I think trust is a big part of it, in any sort of aspect of communication. But I'm not sure what other people think. Yeah.
I think a lot of the time, especially in art, like as I teach art, right? I think it's kind of creating a space to go sideways. And be like, with a complex idea, it's like, what is the complexity in it, right? Is it the language? To break down the things that are difficult, are hard? Is it the kind of the cultural part that you don't understand? Is it that, to kind of, because when you say out there, it could be anything. And it's just like I know I create some stuff where it's like, it's a lot of the stuff I say is from my community, right? Like I like look at the different types of Afro-Caribbean traditions, of Black traditions, of kind of that happen in and amongst us in markets in London, but also in kind of like theatre, avant-garde, dance spaces. And being like, why is one accepted? Why is one difficult? Who has made it like that? Why has one been, because it's like, if we had access to some stuff that are seen as complex young, they may not be so complex. So that's one of the things I'm really looking at, kind of trying to get some of the stuff I'm really interested in to people quite young, actually, because I think actually when we're young, we maybe understand complexities in another way, and that's also fine. So yeah, making space for different types of interpretation, I think, is important.
I love that, the spaces that we create for those different interpretations. Just one of the things that came to mind, because we have got a question actually from someone in here in the Q&A. And before I read that out though, one of the things that was coming to mind is I used to do some work in like SEND schools. And I remember sometimes we're trying to communicate stuff that's so about social justice. And I was like, how do you communicate this in an SEND school where everyone also, because of the function of those schools, is in a totally different stage in their development and learning, which is just about our education system. But when we're trying to do that, it's like using image and the images that you choose to represent, and also using movement of body to maybe sign something out or gesture something. And those are just things that came to mind. But I want to just, because we are starting to run out of time, so I want to get to the one question that we've got in our Q&A, which is there a time when you haven't wanted to communicate with someone or something, or when you felt someone didn't deserve to hear you speak? So a two-part question, I'll read it again. Is there a time when you haven't wanted to communicate with someone or something, or when you felt someone didn't deserve to hear you speak? Anyone on our panel want to answer that one first? Moeed.
Boy, I don't mind having a little pop at that. Yeah, I suppose if I don't want to speak to people, it's all internal, right? It's just the mood I'm in. I feel like I'm in a bit of a negative energy, you know what I'm saying? I don't want other people to feel that, because I think it's very obvious. We've probably all been in scenarios where people have said to us, yo, are you okay? Like, you look like this, or you sound like this. And those are scenarios that I don't really like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, so again, like you, but I like to express myself through my body. We've all done it, I'm very expressive. I like to move around and whatever and jump about. And so the problem with that is that when I don't do that, people are like, yo, is he okay? Do you know what I'm saying? So yeah, I suppose there are times where I don't want to speak to people, but that's not because of the people. It's just simply because I myself feel like I don't have anything to offer positive, do you know what I'm saying? So I'm just taking some time to myself, recalibrate, recalculate, realign, then come back. In terms of people deserving to hear me speak, boy, no, I think I'm happy to speak to anyone. I don't think anyone doesn't deserve to hear me speak. It's not like they're gaining anything, do you know what I'm saying? Like monetary, they're just speaking to a normal guy, the average mo, as I like to call it. Yeah, no, if someone's like, I suppose if we're going to go into, if someone's like really upset me and like hurt me or like hurt my family and stuff, then yeah, obviously I'm not going to speak to them, do you know what I'm saying? But or like stolen all my money, then yeah, then I'm not going to speak to them. But yeah, I give everyone a shot, do you know what I'm saying? I speak to anyone. I'm a kind of trustful guy. Like, you have to lose it rather than try and gain it, if that makes sense. Just kind of the way I approach things.
Thanks, Moeed. Just quickly, Rami, Shenece, anything that you want to say in response? Rami?
Yeah, I think similar to Moeed, that I feel I do, like, you have to lose my trust rather than gain it. But I also think once it is lost, it does take a lot of thinking for me about whether I really do want to say anything, whether I trust this person to listen. And it comes back to that listening thing again, I think. Like, do I trust this person to actively listen to me? Do I trust them to understand where I'm coming from? And if the answer is no, then it's difficult because it can be just as painful not to say anything than to say something. I can't think of a specific instance at the moment, but I can think of like how it's difficult, how painful it is to have this thing that you need to say and know that it won't be understood. Yeah.
For sure. There are a couple of questions. So there's one in the chat, and then there's another one just been sent through on Q&A. So Shenece, anything that you want to respond to on that last one?
I just think, I think there are times like that. I think in queer and Black spaces, we often have a sense of wanting to protect our speech from people who don't want to hear, who don't want to listen, and also for people to be able to speak freely, because people are tired of the silences that come about when they feel in a space that aren't going to listen to them, is not going to protect their voices. And trying to facilitate spaces like that can be difficult, because even within those people, there's not always going to be understanding and expectations of understanding there. So sometimes you do stay silent, and I sometimes worry about like, what is there power lost in not being able to speak in those in places, you know, when you're trying to avoid somebody from hearing what you have to say. But then sometimes there's power in keeping what you have to say to yourself because they don't deserve it. I don't know.
I love that, Shenece, right? The power of protecting myself when I know that I'm not going to be heard, or I know that actually I might come under attack. If I say something, it's just going to become more emotional labor for me. So perhaps I'm just going to keep myself silent in that stage. Now, we can stay for another 10 minutes, I've been told. So in that 10 minutes, we have 2 questions to answer. I want to go to Eliel's one first, because there's a lot in here. So I'll read it out that's in the chat. And when we're trying to communicate important or complex things, how do we facilitate feeling rather than quote unquote just understanding? We can sometimes understand something or someone, but not feel it. Do you think that's important, particularly when thinking about mobilizing the potential of empathy and solidarity across difference? Anyone got thoughts immediately? Getting a nod from you, Shenece. Gonna come straight in there.
I just think, yeah, I was just like, yeah, that's a good question, you know. That's mostly why I was nodding, because not everyone's gonna feel it. And like one of the things of trying to bring people together is kind of understanding that not everyone wants to be together, and there is space held for the kind of disagreement amongst that, which is for sometimes fatal, sadly to say. Like there are times where listening and speaking has really bad implications. So you do want people to feel what somebody has to say. And it's weird, it's funny, I think setting up a space for listening, like in my workshops, for example, has a lot to do with like attuning your ears and everyone speaking at the very beginning, so you kind of understand how this person speaks. You know, like they might cut, like what you might hear from them later, if you heard where they're coming from earlier, maybe that would help you understand a bit more. So that is one of the methods, I think, kind of getting positioning in those conversations.
Yeah, I think as a facilitator myself, know the importance of like that positioning and grounding at the start, right? Rami, I know that you were coming in response.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Yeah, I think it might come back to that vulnerability thing again for me, and how difficult it can be sometimes to feel like, because it's again one of those things that we're not taught, like that it's okay to feel, it's okay, especially in this country, I think. It's okay to feel, it's okay to have empathy, it's okay to cry or weep or laugh or sing or whatever. Just that understanding that emotions are not a bad thing, that they don't make you any less rational, and that they are like an important part of how we communicate, how we are together. I think that can go a long way sometimes. And certainly it won't happen overnight, but it's something to keep repeating, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think creating the space for people to feel that they can even be vulnerable or can have emotions, just labeling that, right? Just labeling that this is a space where you can do that, because people never hear that. Well, I never really grew up hearing that, at least in school or at work, right? It's not something that people say that often. But also something to sit with here is perhaps the power of empathy and the power of activities that bring out that empathy as well. I'm just conscious of time, and we have got one more question to get to, so I want to make sure that we can read this one out. And this one has said, how do you broach the scenarios when you've been misunderstood, or have misunderstood when communication has been the primary challenge? So how do you broach the scenarios when you've been misunderstood, or have misunderstood when communication has been the primary challenge?
That's an approach, in it? I think it's like a little
Yeah.
spell check thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So quickly on the last question, honesty. If you're honest, then the feelings that come with that are just a part of it. But in terms of this question, oh, it's disappeared now.
I'll read it out for you again.
Yeah,
It's
please.
how do you broach the scenarios when you've been misunderstood, or have misunderstood when communication has been the primary challenge?
You've just got to go again, innit? You got to break it down. I think miscommunication is such an easy, like, there's been so many, but it's been innocent. Do you know what I'm saying? It's just like an innocent misunderstanding. And I'm like, yo, is this correct? You go back to whoever you were speaking to and kind of break it down. Now, I think I think the main thing is just actively taking the time to go back and iron things out and make sure you're both on the same, or all of you are on the same wavelength and on the same page before going out and doing doing what it is you're going to do. Like I said, misunderstanding each other is not a bad thing. I think allowing it to fester and linger is where it starts to get complicated. If one of you or some of you realize something was said or came across incorrectly, then I think it's just about you taking the time to correct that and make sure, because it's unfair if the other one person is doing one thing according to what they thought was going on, everyone else is doing something else, you know. So that's how I would approach it. I'm a very upfront guy in it, so if I've made a mistake, I will tell the person, yo, this is what I thought, like, am I wrong, am I right, kind of thing. But obviously a lot of people don't do that. So if there was a misunderstanding, me personally, I'd go there and make sure everyone kind of like was on the same wavelength.
Love that. Thank you, Moeed. Rami, Shenece, anything to jump in and add here?
I think for me, what I do is get terrified. I'm like, conflict is not easy for me, I think. And often, like, I have to really calm myself down and like really stop myself from thinking this is all my fault. I have to fix this. I have to change this or something. It's like, it's very like deep sort of anxious reaction that happens when I'm misunderstood. And I think what Moeed was saying about going back to it and like ironing it out, being in communication with someone else, particularly someone who you trust and who is there for you, that is super helpful, because it also is a reminder that, like, you know, you're all right. This person still loves you, if it is the person who loves you. This is not the end of the world. You've just got through a difficult moment, and it goes back to what Eliel was saying about sometimes we have difficult conversations, and they're important too. Yeah.
Thank you, Rami. Shenece, I'm going to give you the last word on this.
Don't do that. No, I'm joking. I appreciate it. As someone who may be less upfront and maybe more anxious about these kind of moments of misunderstanding, what has helped me, especially maybe as an artist, I guess, is that like understanding is maybe one part of the conversation. You know, maybe that yes, if you can fix it, if you can fix it, that is one thing. Repetition and kind of going back, opening it up, opening the questions, admitting your wrongs, those sort of spaces. If you can get facilitators that can do that for you, yeah, shout out to Moeed there. Out Bilal as well. You know, yeah, wonderful people who are kind of, that's wonderful if you can bring other people in that will help bring understanding. But that not letting misunderstanding fester in you, knowing that like you understood where you were coming from, and that not everyone will come from a place of wanting to understand, and not everyone will come from a place of not everyone will willfully be a misunderstanding, but some people will, like in these day and age on the internet, some people might willfully misunderstand you, and understanding where you're coming from and why you do what you do and why you said what you said is important. Yeah, and finding peace in your voice, you know, and what you have to say for yourself.
Thank you, Shenece, Rami, Moeed. Thank you so much, our incredible panel. I'm going to give you a round of applause. That's going to be awkward because it's me in my own house clapping, but I'm going to do it anyway. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared today. We've talked
Sorry,
a lot.
but thank you, Bilal. I just want to say quickly.
Yeah, shout out to you.
And I was pointing at Bilal. I wasn't putting my hand up.
Thank you so much for your words. I think there's been a lot of chat here today, lots of space of reflection, lots of space of sharing, and also lots of fun, which is the three things I said at the start. So I'm glad that we were able to do this here together. As ever, people here, if you've still got things to say, the chat is there open for any final messages that you want to send. But I want to say thank you. It's been a great evening that I've spent with you all. And I'm going to pass back over to Lauren just to say a few last words before we head out tonight.
Yeah, just to say thank you on behalf of Metroland to everybody, the four of you, Bilal, Rami, Shenece, and Moeed, and to everybody who's been present and offered so much generously. There was a comment about this being some useful free therapy. I had a message from a friend saying the same thing on WhatsApp during the conversation. So I think we can really hold something about listening here, about kind of a proactive welcome for listening. And also I love what you said at the end, Shenece, about finding peace in your own voice. Like we can just find a way of holding our own power. There's so much in that. So huge thanks to all of you. Our final conversation on this will be about doing, and that will be in a couple of weeks on the 14th of December. So we'll be talking about, you know, once we've been able to talk together, once we've been able to move together, once we've been able to gather together, what do we do together? So all of y'all's input will be very, very richly received in that space. So just a huge thanks. And yeah, feel free to keep putting your thoughts in the chat. And if you have any feedback for us or want to share anything with any of the speakers, feel free to reach us at Metroland. But that's it for us tonight. Big thanks. And yeah, speakers, if you can hang on for a minute after we let everybody go, I'd be grateful. Thanks. Bye, everyone.